Hi, everybody. We are live. What's your perspective? LENSEC is live today, and we are broadcasting in lots of places. You might be seeing us on Facebook or LinkedIn Live. You might be seeing this on YouTube. It's also possible you could be picking this up on our website, lensec.com/live. We broadcast in all of these places. We've recently changed some of our scheduling. We'll be broadcasting every other week, but you can watch out for us on your Facebook social media stream, also on LinkedIn, and we'll be announcing the upcoming topic for the day. But we are going to limit our broadcast to every other week. So you're lucky if you're watching. This is your week, and we are live today. What's your perspective? Normally, you'd be seeing Neil Haley hosting this show. Neil's out sick today, and he's taking some time to rest and recover. So you get me. I'm Keith Harris, and I'm the marketing manager at LENSEC. And What's Your Perspective is a show that we host for our watchers, our listeners. This is not only showing up on social media today, but will be rebroadcast after the fact on the What's Your Perspective podcast. So welcome today, and thanks for joining us. You can only see me because I don't have any guests here with me. However, we are going to be hearing from a previous guest on our show, Guy Grace with Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, and also the security director for Littleton Public Schools in Colorado, was on with us recently talking about how schools are dealing with this pandemic that we're all having to struggle with. And he took some time to focus in on a couple of things. The things that he focused in on for us were not only how things are going in these crazy times with the pandemic happening, but also in taking a look forward at what's happening with the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools and what people need to consider, what school districts and administrators and security directors need to consider when it comes to reopening schools. I do have some news for you. There's some new guidelines out from the CDC. We're going to go over those guidelines after we hear from Guy. So let me get this up and running here, and we'll hear from Guy Grace.
LENSEC Live, What's Your Perspective radio show / TV show, and I'm excited for an unbelievable show again today. I have Keith Harris from LENSEC and also Guy Grace from the past. And Guy, how are you doing today? And how are you surviving quarantine in certain aspects at the beginning of COVID? I know you're in your office now, but how have you been dealing with it?
Well, it's been quite challenging, I'm sure, for all of us, the entire country. It's a really sad situation. I'm hoping that we start recovering as a nation, and that includes our schools, as we know that schools are such a critical provide such a critical service and education for our students, and they also help to keep society stable. So I'm doing just fine. I'm looking at it as not an extended summer, but that's kind of like where we are in that mode in the basis of safety and security right now, where we're doing, we call it after-hours security, and controlling the access to our schools, and also creating plans and procedures for the hopefully coming up here, returning to school in August.
Awesome. That's great. Guy, you have a lot of experience, many years in security in the school realm. So tell us where you are right now, what's up, what's going on. And I know a lot of people know your name and know your face, but we're excited to have you here. But give those that don't know you maybe a background about yourself.
Thank you. Well, I've been here in Littleton Public Schools for 31 years. I've been the safety and security director since 1999, right after Columbine. After that, after the Columbine, our school district decided to create separate the security department into its own entity. Our security's been existent in my school district since the 1980s, but I started in 1989 and been here since then. Before that, I worked contract security for another school district in another city in the state of Colorado. And before that, I was in the U.S. Army and served in the military police. And so it's been how do I say it, interesting 36 years, on call 24/7, 365. Kind of looking forward to a little bit of a change on that and things, but love what we do, and I'm honored to be here with Neil and you, as always. Thank you for inviting me today.
Well, absolutely. It's great always talking to you, Guy. And one of the reasons you're here is your role. So what is your role, first of all? Tell us a little bit about the role that you do at the school district you're located in security, as Director of Security.
Well, yes, sir. I'm the Director of Security for an Emergency Preparedness. So what I do is, my role is basically I'm responsible for the safety and security of our students, staff, and visitors and that come onto our school grounds. Also have a lot of responsibility in the components of safety and security, such as securing the buildings, implementation of security technology, but a really big role for me is emergency preparedness. And that's probably 60% of my job. And that's about creating processes and procedures and implementing components that mitigate, multitude of different hazards. So anything from the weather to active shooter threat. But now here we are with a microbiology or basically a virus and working into mitigating that, something that, we had a lot of planning and things like that in our past. I remember with SARS and the different things over the years, we basically have been mitigating through those emergencies, but this is unparalleled to where we're dealing with now. I never have seen anything like this. So this is a new, a new challenge for my district and districts across the country and our nation. And it's very, very, very challenging. And I'm hoping that we can help a lot to get our country back on its economic powerhouse that it was on. And I feel like we have some good plans and going forward, and it's exciting as an emergency planner to help my district and help others to go forward and be able to keep our country and get our country back on track here. We look at, why I keep saying that is, we look at on any given day across the United States, 40% of our population's in the schools on any given day. And so you think about that, moms and dads have to, when they go to work, they count on our school systems to educate their children and keep them safe. Or when my wife is in the school, or your husbands or wives are in schools working, we need to be able to basically hope that everybody's safe and in those schools, because that's what keeps society function. We're a huge part of keeping society function for the now and for the future, obviously, in education.
There's been some huge, when you say unprecedented, that's an understatement of the year, or maybe of the millennium, because really you have to go all the way back to the flu epidemic in 1918 to see anything of the magnitude that we're experiencing now. And you can't really draw too many parallels for schools from what they did back then, because the culture and the technology and even the way they do school is completely different, right?
No, totally. We look at, we didn't have those types of components back in 1918. I mean, we had, our country's, I wasn't around. I mean, but if we look at those things, we are not, we can compare what helped our nation back then. And a lot of people say fresh air. We look at what medical response back then was and compare it to now. It wasn't anything like it is now. And it's a huge challenge. And it's such a huge challenge for us nowadays to make sure that we keep our students safe and our staff safe on any given day with something that we can't even see, or even really, I hate to say it, there's a lot of different opinions everywhere, and that's the challenge for us as the end user, we'll say, like we like to use, but us, the stakeholders in the K through 12, what is our direction and things like that. So we are working hard with all the information that is provided to us from our CDC and from our government above us.
And we're going to find out more and more about that in this conversation, because I definitely want to pick your brain in that area, talking about K through 12 and what's happening from someone that's very knowledgeable, that knows firsthand and has maybe some of the inside secrets of what he can say. But before that, let's talk about, we mentioned you're from the past. We didn't mention, you work for a school district. Let's talk about the past before we even get into your role. For people that might not know, tell about what the past is.
Well, the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools is a group of volunteers that creates guidelines and recommendations for schools across the country to basically implement processes and procedures and components in a holistic way that enables a school district to basically, in all of the components, we talk about emergency preparedness, we talk about security systems and technology, we talk about incident command, we talk about learning, we talk about culture and climate. And those are recommendations that we put forth from best practices that we've learned from other end users across the country, and basically combine manufacturers, integrators, the government, schools, law enforcement, and putting forward all kinds of good information that helps these schools to basically put forward guidelines that helps them to implement this in a holistic way for their school districts. It was recognized by the Department of Homeland Security as a good best practices that can be implemented in schools across the country, and we are honored to be recommended by the Department of Homeland Security in that way, as endorsed by them, and we appreciate that. So it's been very, very, very a good organization. As we stated, we're non-paid volunteers, and we also don't receive any kind of money from any industry out there in any way. All we do is put best practices out there in a way that is not impacted by others or the views of others, just best practices, and they're all for free. They can be downloaded from the website passk12.org, passk12.org.
All right, and it's Keith, as I have worked with and learned, there's a lot of components in the past guidelines, Keith. And those guidelines are interesting to look at because it's every realm of security. I've gotten an education from Guy and other amazing guests on the past K through 12 show that I've been co-hosting and doing interviews with Keith, and it's blown me away, the different ways that we look at security. And now the newest way, which we can't wait to get to at one point today.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I just wanted to bring up these guidelines real quick and just show folks this goes into a ton of detail. If you look here, they can give you good information about how to scope out a project, how to set up video, how to set up important things like access control, and things like that. It goes pretty deep into a security footprint for a school. Is there anything in particular you want to point out on this guy while I have it up?
Well, so right now we have the 4th edition that's up. We are in the process. We'll be releasing the 5th edition very, very soon. But we've also been expanding different things, like we have COVID recommendations that are coming out for how to apply these past recommendations to securing your building to protect it during the COVID-19 emergency and going forward to help our school districts across the country in a security aspect and a sense. Obviously, there's a lot to do on the medical side, but we, like all hazards, we can't neglect all of the different things and the different layers as we're seeing there. We need to think about the policies and the procedures, and we need to think about how we're going to apply that in the district-wide layer, and then the components and all the components such as architect, communication, access control. All those different things have to be done through all the different layers of safety and security. How are we going to do screening and all those other things that are coming on, and which we'll be talking about a little bit here? How are we going to do? Yeah. There's so many things. So, when we look at this version 4, there's a little, when we talk about the processes and procedures of emergency preparedness, I probably would say one of the most valuable things that school districts had in place was from, over the years, because we've been experienced, unfortunately, sadly, emergencies such as active shooter incidents or tornadoes that have ravaged communities and school districts or other disasters. We have been implementing a lot of strong incident command and a lot of strong processes and procedures in emergency preparedness. School districts across the country have been doing that. And I think that in those processes and developing, they have done really good job in developing relationships or mutual agreements of understanding with community partners such as their local health departments and other places, and on hospitals and their nursing programs. And I think that was probably one of the biggest benefits that we had in that past from mitigating past hazards and being able to be prepared for today's hazard was by having those past emergency preparedness policies, procedure, or components in place have allowed us to basically come up and have a plan for something we had no clue about.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about how detailed these guidelines are, but they brought people in, experts like yourself. So what is your role with the PASS?
Well, my role is I'm the chairman of the advisory board. So, and also as I move on to new things, I'm going to be also a consultant for the group to go out and help other school districts with implementing school safety, basically helping school districts implement the components of school safety in a holistic way that helps them to build, good programs, what they can do across the country. And that's what my role is. So we're developing that role right now a little bit more. And I'm pretty excited about that. And I'm hoping that what I'll be able to do is help other districts. I wouldn't say an expert. What I would say is I want to help others to avoid some of the pitfalls and challenges and tragedies that I've seen in my career, if that makes sense. If I can help people learn from my mistakes or mistakes that I've observed or triumphs and things like that, I think that's the best thing that I could do as a human being.
And see, I consider you definitely an expert in especially certain areas of security. That's knowing it from been there, done it, and try to develop it at your district. It's a wide level. So he's definitely an expert. Trust me.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. I would say that what I would say is, it's when we all get the privilege to work for a place for a long time, we do learn a lot. And I hope that, that's what I want to do is I kind of want to be, my role to be, if I could be the professor of hard knocks, let me be that.
Well, I have a question for you, and it relates to our partners, our value-added resellers, the people who we rely on to go out to talk to the schools and to build the relationships in the business. What advice do you have for them as security integrators for how they can help their schools adhere and point them towards the PASS guidelines?
First of all, what I would say to any integrator out there that is helping our nation's schools, remember what you are putting in, whether it be a motion detector or a door contact or door lock or video management system, your technology impacts many lives and protects many lives on any given day, and that protects it in so many different ways that they don't realize that. So integrators are very much, I would say, unsung heroes that a lot of times don't get that acknowledgement of how important they are to helping keeping our schools, nation secure. So what I would say to any integrator is have that pride of what you're doing. It's a partnership. When you go to a school district, you're establishing a partnership with that school district. You're also establishing a partnership with that community. And one of the things that's so important about safety and security, a lot of people neglect to see, is when you sell your house or you're looking to refinance your house for a mortgage or something of that aspect, a lot of the value of your house is tied back to how good that school district is. And safety and security, if the school district's not safe and secure, and not providing an excellent education foundation and educating those children in a way, your value, your property is going to go down. So it's so tremendous about how important integrators are, and just to realize that. So that's why when we recommend to go to the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools.org or, Partner Alliance for Safer Schools website, you could download those recommendations. You could attend our courses and you can attend our trainings and things like that. And they will help you to basically work with those school districts, work with people like myself, and basically help you to do good business. But again, integrators, if you're listening to this right now, please realize how important you are. You must realize how important you are to keeping our schools safe and doing things and doing good business right now. And it's so important right now because now school districts have another type of threat that we imagined, but not to this extent. I'm just waiting for Godzilla to come out of the ocean next week. Okay.
It's interesting, Guy. When we talked and we talked about different things, we're always talking about school shootings in our conversations or active shooter. We never knew that something like this would the COVID-19. So talk about now how your life has changed as a security director with COVID-19. I mean, just
we see. Here's the deal. We and I worry about this. Being through. I remember back in 1999, and when we had Columbine happen, and the other school safety emergencies, we get so focused on those types of hazards, but then sometimes in school districts we can neglect the other hazards, so to say. So my worry is the same situation. What those active threat incidents, those weather incidents, those bullying, those psychological mental health issues, those culture and climate issues, none of those are going to be disappeared. They have not disappeared. They're still there. In fact, I would challenge anybody who would disagree that mental health concerns are probably a lot higher right now than any other time. So what we have to do is we have to create we have to figure out things right now with the new normal. We have a new normal, and those things we have to figure out. How are we going to protect our staff and our students, and basically and go to the next level? And it's a whole new normal. How are we going to ensure that our children are going to be educated for the future in this challenge, and how are they going to be safe and secure? And there's been so many different things that we have to consider as we go forward. And there's a lot of planning. So if you want me to share, I'd be very happy to share with your audience some of the things that we're thinking about right now that are on our brains. Okay. So there's things that we have to think about in emergency preparedness. Number one, how are we have vulnerable populations in our schools. Our educators, we have educators that might have health issues. We have students that might have health issues. So those are things we have to think about if we bring them back to the schools. How is COVID-19, which we've all seen COVID-19 across the country, it disproportionately or basically affects more people that are vulnerable than the healthy population. So those are things that we have to consider. What are we going to do to ensure that our vulnerable populations are not impacted? So there's things like we have to look at. We're going to have to look at smaller class sizes, which is meaning that, we might have to cut, a lot of schools across the country have class sizes of 30 kids or more. What you might be seeing is staggered schedules and cutting classes sizes down to 12 to 15 students per class, so to say, and staggering. So that means you're going to have split scheduling. So you're going to have some kids will come in. So we're going to probably have schools, our typical, in my district, for example, is schools are occupied by students from 7 to 4 p.m. every day. But now we're going to probably see schools occupied from 7 to 8 p.m. every day and things. So those are things. Things that are not going to change, we're going to have to make sure that those schools are safe. We're going to have to also maybe even bring more, we looked at how much building hardening we've done on entrances and things. Now we're going to have to so-called harden entrance monitoring for COVID and virus things. So how is that going to be done and things like that? And there's a lot of things that have to. We're also going to think about how we do lunch times and meal times in the school. We're going to have to stagger our lunch times and our meal times. So here we go with I see a slide up here and schools during the COVID environment.
This is one that was shared from the CDT and has some good stuff that exactly like what you're talking about. It talks about how to phase in and when to open and what you might need to be thinking about, going forward. So monitoring in place is a key factor, and still providing online solutions for those who can't come in. I mean, you're going to have to bridge across many different ideas here in order to get school back up and running.
That's correct. And I want to point out to people that the CDC is probably what most of the school districts are going to be following, those recommendations, and they should be following those CDC recommendations who our local health departments, like for us, it's Tri-County Health, would be working with those local health departments and facilitating and putting those things in together for us to go back to school and following all those recommendations as well. So I see another part in here that we need to think about too is transportation. Yeah. Transportation is huge.
Oh, I was just thinking about that. How can you practice social distancing with school buses? That's crazy. Kids can't just, how can you do that? That's going to be really hard.
No, and that's the thing about, the most you can do is reduce the risk. And we're going to have to, as you guys know, school buses can carry up to, probably 85 students,
Yeah.
So we're going to have to cut that back and look at staggering school buses. So what you do see here, if anything, what we're seeing here is expensive, very, very expensive challenges that are going to be, it's almost like you're doubling your operation expenses and things like that to operate these countermeasures to this invisible threat. We need to think too. We talked about a little bit about mental health, our special needs students. We need to come up having special needs students. How are we going to educate those young people through the challenges that they have to give them a great educational process? And those are things that we are doing. But here's another one is, we need to think about our PPE and our, personal protective equipment and our sanitation standards. As that CDC slide you put up there, those are things, but again, where are we going to go? Our mental health support for students, that's huge. We need to be thinking about how we're going to, right now, I can tell you in this right now, nothing has changed in regards to how we are doing interventions. Like last night, we had 4 suicide idealizations or call outs for help last night, and we're still doing those things. We do count on the communities to help us with that quite a bit. Like if you see something, say something. If your friend's feeling sad, we're not in there. We're not in there to judge them. What we're there is to help them and making sure that these kids understand that they have people there to help them and things.
Yeah, but parents being overwhelmed with working from home, teaching their kids, trying to manage everything. Parents are not left out of this either. They have some major.
I just don't know how you juggle this at all. There's so many logistics.
He's got 6 kids, so he's having to juggle it.
The new normal. I'm saying the new normal is going to be a lot more difficult than people are saying, not having the conversation about schools. It started on CNN last night a little bit, but ultimately I'd say keep them closed and keep them online, to be honest with you, if you're going to look at all those measures till we get a vaccine. And I think that these things need to be more conversation-wise situation. But then even with the vaccine, you still have to have some of those measures in place because a vaccine's not going to be foolproof. It's going to have other things if there is a vaccine. There's just so many unknowns in our conversation going on things. Guy, one question I wanted to kind of go to is we've talked about you. Well, what is the past thinking about now? I mean, I'm sure it hit them like wow, you guys were working on your guidelines, because we were coordinating to try to do some stuff with your fleet management to add our fleet solution types of ideas to the mix, and then COVID hits, and then everybody is like changing we're just going everywhere. How's the past dealt with this, especially non-for-profit organization? How they not expecting, we were expecting all go to ISC West. It was a couple weeks before, and then bam, I mean, I think you and I were planning on hanging out together. Then things got worse and worse, and then they finally canceled it. But ultimately, that's when you had other plans pass, and how you guys had to do a big shift.
Well, that's why I have a shiny head of mine right now, because of so much glare from doing all these virtual meetings for the last couple of months. So we've had a lot of virtual meetings and things, and it's really sad because, like Neil, when I met you and Keith, I believe over at the ISC last year and things, we really do count on those meetings and the ability for us to go and walk through and learn about new technology or new components that are going to be available to help our nation's schools. But when I look at where we are now, just like the kids are learning, we're learning right now on social media, and like we're doing on Zoom right now, and I think that's amazing. And things just like we should never forget that if we're at home, that we make sure we have our pants on when we stand up or whatever. But or like my parrot in the background when I'm at home, he talks and mimics everything I say. But it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that we are all dealing with. But as a past group, again, we're learning from this and how we're doing Zoom meetings, and what we're learning from this, we're putting forward into new recommendations or for the new guidelines down the road. And we will have help pamphlets. We worked with the National School Board Association about 3 weeks ago and put together some tips on how physical security components could be used to secure the campuses during and after the COVID emergency. So when we talked about the integrators before, they're going to have a tremendous role in getting our schools back to normal. We're going to probably see integrators offering medical, some type of thermal devices or temperature devices.
Right.
That's going to be in integrators' inventories, because a lot of those systems will work with the access control system or the video management system. So it's logical for end users right now. Again, our country, we're a capitalist society. We need to have integrators looking at this and capitalizing on and helping our schools. There's nothing wrong with that. We need that investment to help our schools go forward and stay functioning.
Yeah, you bring that point up, and it's really a great point. I just did some research on this recently, and the one thing that's important to note is the so-called fever cameras are not a diagnostic tool. They're a triage tool. And so it's going to be very important for schools not only to use those right in order to identify potential contact or potential infected persons, but they're also going to need personnel to be able to verify diagnostically, school nurses, that kids really do have fevers. The other thing that comes up, IPVM, IP Video Market, which is a great resource that we rely on in our industry, has really been kind of taking the forefront in making sure that integrators understand some of these tools work well and some of them don't. Mm-hmm. And how you deploy them, where you install them, plays a big factor in that, and whether or not you're going to get an accurate reading. So make sure you're doing your research. And this would be my word of industry advice to school administrators and security directors. Make sure you're doing your research and choosing the right tools. And you got to pay a lot of money for this stuff up front, and you're going to be using it for years to come. So make sure you get it right on the front end.
Well, on the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, for example, we put out a caution on fever screening technologies white paper just last week. And it's important to note that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration regulates the use of thermomatic systems, is what we're talking about, thermal cameras. And the important thing to realize is the FDA has suspended evaluations of all processes and procedures and products during this COVID emergency. So school districts could potentially be buying equipment that is not going to be sanctioned by the government and cannot be used in that application, because we're talking about something that is a medical device that is detecting temperatures of anywhere from 93.2 to 102.2 Fahrenheit. But I would, if anybody needs some information on that, we have a pretty good white paper out there on it. Again, we're not saying that thermal cameras, I actually think they're in the future. I believe they're going to be part of our inventory.
Yes.
But that's where when we talked about the importance of integrators and we talked about the importance of all of us working together, we need to come forward and work with our CDC, our FDA, our security industry, our integrators, and our end users here. Like you said, putting that in the schools in a manner that does not compromise the school or that HIPAA information and FERPA of our students in any way. Because one of the things, too, if you put something in and because you have that whole cultural concern in your schools, because there's a lot of, we all know that we watch social media every day. There's a lot of different beliefs on what COVID is and what's going on. We do that. It would be a nightmare if it was done wrong in a school. It'd be like you put some technology in, hey, you're doing illegal tracking, things like that. You know, what would do is you could potentially make schools even the sense, because the illusion, I hate to say this, and I'm not saying school safety is an illusion, but the perception of moms and dads when they bring their kids to school is I'm bringing my kid to a safe place. Mm-hmm. If we do that wrong and make it look unsafe, it's not going to help us in any way. It's going to be a disaster for school safety. Right. If we don't do this right.
And we were talking off air about homeschooling and how some families are going to choose that. I ultimately believe that if you have somebody and you're seeing that that's a, you know, there's compliant children and say, oh my gosh, you got your work done in 2 to 3 hours. People are going to consider the homeschooling. There'll be less kids. So it'll be all that, or fear. But let's talk about the landscape. Where do you see security now when the kids return to school? That's the biggest thing for me. You've kind of mentioned little pieces of it, but where do you see schools and security regarding COVID-19 once they come back? You mentioned certain things, but now let's talk about security, product security as a security team when they all come back.
Well, right now, and I'm going to go to a little bit of this like white paper I've been working on for the National Association of School Boards Association. And I would say that what we're looking at is a lot of entrance hardening. And what I don't mean about entrance hardening, but putting in devices and things like that, how we're going to do detection, how we're going to do screening at the schools. But another thing that you might be seeing in there is when we were talking about staggering schedules and things, how the access control systems are going to be utilized to basically facilitate the egress and ingress into the schools in a safe way. But we can't forget about the threats that are always there, such as active threat and weather and things like that. But you'll see us using, like a lot of the things that we're doing now is, we have a lot of good technology in our corona response that are utilized. Like, for example, a big one now is access control. We're restricting access to the schools, in our schools. We have the video management systems that allows us to monitor those things. So those are things that are going to be used on every given day. So here's what I would say to you, Neil. The biggest one for us, number one, is emergency and crisis management is huge. And for us as a school going forward, school districts going forward, that's where they need to start. Those things don't cost a lot of money to do. They need to go in there, work with their local health departments, like the slide you guys put from the CDC, and understand the expectations going forward. So planning is huge. But number two, another major one is know what COVID-19 is.
Yes.
That's as we said, it's all over the place. So is that slide Keith pulled up from the CDC, that's huge for us as a school district because that helps us to get direction. Yeah. Direction from an authority from, say, the CDC and our local health department. So what we say in pass, and as a school district here, is you need to understand how COVID is transmitted, you need to understand social distancing, but we also need to empower our staff and our students going forward. They need to understand, so for example, what we put out in PASS is, as we say in PASS guidelines, we're empowering people, But we also, others need to understand how they're going to empower students and staff going forward, how to understand COVID-19, how their responsibility is to mitigate COVID-19 and the threat. So stay home when you're sick.
Yeah.
You cough or sleep. All those standard precautions that we hear every day have to be in place to the schools. Things that are going to happen in the school sense when we talk about that empowerment piece is school districts are going to have to be very cognitive of the cleaning regimens of our schools. So like Keith brought up about the school buses, and Neil, you brought up too about school buses. We're going to have to, there's a lot of cleaning that's going to have to take place, not only in the classrooms, but everywhere we go. It's going to be something that has to, if we think about restaurants and things, like you're going to, once that lunch table clears out, that first staggered lunch schedule, you're probably going to have a custodian back there with some cleaning gear, cleaning up for the next one coming, which didn't happen in the past. Now those things are going to happen. So, but CDC guidance is huge. And they typically, they have a coronavirus updated response for schools to follow, and it's under NCOB, Community Organizations and Cleaning Disinfection, HTML. So you can find that link there. It is upgraded constantly by the CDC. So most of the public health departments across the country are using those recommendations and bringing them back forward to the school district. Another one is we need to know, school districts, we need to, going forward, is identify, Neil, how you said that could be like your recommendation or your thought of going forward is maybe for a while until there is a inoculation or more herd immunity in place. We need to, right now, we've identified who our essential employees are for now, mitigating this emergencies. Yeah. But going forward, we're going to have to identify who our essential personnel are going to be doing those cleanups, doing that maintenance of the buildings, and doing the safety and security and the learning and instruction and all that in an operational sense and things like that. So that's going to be including
the personnel. I mean, you're coming back to school is going to be tricky to get personnel in the right places.
Exactly.
To have, to be able to do fever screening and thermometer testing before you let kids into facilities. Who comes into a facility, who doesn't, who's monitoring any sort of monitoring effect that you put into place, whether it's fever sensors or cameras or something like that. Somebody's going to have to monitor that, and somebody's going to have to administrate it, and then you're going to have school nurses in place to help manage this stuff. So it really gets mind-boggling. I don't envy you the work that you guys have ahead of you.
I don't. I feel very sad for what is coming. Because we all realize, when we talk about our integrators and we talk about our end users and we talk about our manufacturers and we talk about the community, how that is, it's such a myriad of people who are so important to safety and security. And this is like, but usually we can see our threat. This is a threat that we cannot see. It's an invisible enemy. And sadly, that's the problem. And also the views about this threat are so mixed, as Neil had stated. They're so mixed everywhere. Yeah. So the biggest thing for us as school officials is go forward in a sense of not creating fear, but creating, sorting chaos. Yeah. And making it to where, kind of like what we do when we have an active shooting situation. You go forward, the new normal, you go forward, and your job is to ensure that those kids don't feel like they're coming to a bad place. We want them to feel like they're safe there. And until we do, but we must also realize too, that sadly, if we don't do something about coming up with something, I don't know if our country is going to recover. And we, we heard that old saying from the early 1900s, education's the chief defense of nations, or I don't know where that was. But as a veteran, I think that used to say, okay, yeah. But, when we look at that, when you look at the broader thought of that, it is. Education helps keep society in a functioning place. And that's why it's so critical for us going forward to work together. And the brains out there's a lot of brains out there that help us sort through all this chaos. And I think that's, us having this conversation today is very proactive. And I think that's what needs to continue to keep going forward. Because like we talked about before the show, what we're talking about today might be obsolete in July.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, the last point involving security trends, video surveillance, types of security products involving this. Now, you talked about temperature, access control. How do you see video surveillance in this process?
Well, okay, here's one that's really been really cool. And so, we think about, we have video management systems. And most school districts across the country have a tremendous video management systems, or good ones, but they also have mass notification systems. So for like myself, I'm going to stay agnostic on brands and things like that. But we have 3,200 speakers out there in our school district scattered all around the schools. So I was thinking, how could we do social distancing? And let's say that we have somebody that's not doing what they're supposed to after, out there. Because there's people, it's when the schools are closed right now, people are utilizing their school grounds. The jungle gyms are off limits, so to say. They've been taped off and things like that by our health department. But the video management system has been really valuable for us now in maintaining safety and security, and then using that using those mass notification systems, or, on the intercom level, and saying, hey, how are you doing out there? With the camera system, and saying, hey, the health department we're not allowed to, you can't be using that playground equipment the way you're doing it right now because it's in violation of the health order. But what it's doing is it's allowing us to, number one, keep safety and security in mind all day long, but also use it for us to keep social distancing, but also, too, not being like putting a person out there to, number one, be an overlord, so to say. I kind of like it because we have a spiel made up that is doesn't sound like God coming over the intercom or something, but but we're able to see and use that. So that's an example. But going forward, though, we see how valuable video systems are, is that accountability piece. It's video is so important for the accountability piece, knowing where people are, where they're in the building, and utilizing that with other security components, such as your access control and other things. So going forward, a lot of people, we talked about thermal cameras, or we talked about other security, I talk about facial recognition, okay? We have a facial recognition pilot here in my school district, and we're going forward with it. There's things that video management systems aren't just cameras anymore. They're kind of like they're a backbone system. They're a central nervous system for your schools. But what they do is they're allowing us to mitigate many different hazards on any given day, and including helping us with the COVID-19 right now. And in more ways, what they're bringing out down the road is going to be even more tremendous.
Yeah, we're working really towards trying to unify a security platform that pulls in lots of different pieces of the puzzle. And that's what integration is all about. It's bringing all those things together in a way that can be managed, tied to video for live monitoring purposes. I heard of a university here in Texas that had a break-in in their, while all their students are away, all their staff is away. And, I imagine that's happening everywhere with.
We had a group meeting with other security directors around the country, and there were some articles out there. Some school districts have seen 100% increase in crime.
Right.
So, but I would say to you, we've had, we've had a few little incidents here and there, but the video management system helps us to have that accountability piece. Like, for example, we had a kid throw some clay and some boards at a camera and, did some things. But you know what? When he did it, his face was right there and we were able to work with the school to say, hey, what are you doing? But that's proactive. That actually, where I'm going with this is, if people know that if they're up to no good and they're not doing anything wrong, they're going to be on the school grounds, no big deal. They're out walking, exercising. We want people to do those things, do everything in a way for the interest of the public. But if you're out there doing vandalism or about ready to do something that you're not supposed to, utilizing your video management systems and other surveillance is a deterrent act. And it keeps that person from getting into trouble, at least at your school. You can go somewhere else and cause trouble, but at least at your school in this time period right now, it's been very helpful for us to be doing that. But again, I just think, like you just said, one of the things you'll see in version 5 for the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, we're endorsing what you just said. And it's all about what we call the unified security systems. And the unified security system is about all of these things, about bringing in all these different technologies in, and it doesn't have to be one brand. It could be a multitude of brands. Like, for example, in my security system here in the Littleton Public Schools, I think we have like 32 vendors right now that are providing different technologies. And what we look at is bringing the best that we can bring into our school district. And that unified security is kind of like the old days of PISM. Now it's kind of physical security information management. It's not obsolete, but I really believe that the new word, like you said, thanks for saying that, Keith, is unified security. And that's huge going forward. Your video management system, your access control platform, your visitor management, your mass notification, your mass communication, which there's a big difference between that. All of these things, your doors, your locks, all of these things, your card readers, all of these things working together holistically. And I'm not forgetting your fire systems and your HVAC systems and things like that. And that's really good. Why, when we talked about integrators and manufacturers in this meeting, is it's so important for those relationships from company to company to be developed. So drives or initiatives can be done to make their technologies work together. And I think that that's important going forward to continue, because what is happening with that unified security approach to school safety is it's improving schools across the country in many different ways to providing safety and security. Now, look, here we are going forward, how important the security industry is going to be to helping save the day in the COVID-19.
Guy Grace from the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools. That was recorded several weeks ago. Some things have changed in regard to COVID-19 and how schools are moving forward with certain things. I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation today, before we started the video, that there are some certain guidelines that are coming up, and I'm getting ready to pull some of those up for us here and take a look at what's happening now. I mean, this conversation with Guy happened several weeks ago, and so just since then, as a matter of fact, just last week, there was a brand new guideline that showed up from CDC. So let me share my screen here and show what that looks like. CDC here is talking about how to prepare K through 12 school administrators for a safe return to school. This is updated guidelines, and this includes several items that are also worth considering. Let me pull my notes out of the way here and take a look at these guidelines. So at the CDC, I can provide this link to you later down in the comments, but there's many things that they're pointing towards in these guidelines. And I wanted to show you, kind of highlight some of the things that are important, that are really critical for administrators, okay? So engaging, encouraging everyone in school and in the community to practice preventive behaviors. There's nothing new there, but what this is built around is the idea that school is so very important in the child's life. Any child that's going to school has a great deal of social interaction that they're dealing with, and there's many, many different things that are key to consider. And so when you're looking at some of these guidelines here, other things that are important are developing mitigation strategies and implementing multiple different ones such as social distancing, using face coverings at school. Hand hygiene is always important at schools. And there's a new word that I learned called cohorting. And if I pull this back up, I can show you what cohorting is. Cohorting is sometimes called potting. It's a new term for a strategy that schools are using to limit contact between students, student to student, student to staff, staff to student, etc. And so this is part of the school's effort to limit transmission of disease within the school. Part of this includes decreasing opportunities of exposure, reducing contact with shared surfaces, facilitating a more efficient contact tracing at schools in the event of a positive case. And so part of this also involves keeping student cohorts together in one classroom and having teachers rotate between the classrooms. Schools can alternate cohorts by days or weeks, and with cohorts assigned to specific days or weeks. And they can also use a hybrid approach with some of these cohorts, pod groups of kids assigned to in-person learning and others assigned to online learning. So that you'll see some of these being implemented in school as we head into later this month and into September for schools to get started again. Other things that are important to note here are communicating, educating, and enforcing appropriate hygiene and social distancing practices. Some of the things that you'll see is a limitation or a cancellation of extracurricular activities where social distancing isn't feasible. You'll also, school administrators will want to take into account the level of community transmission. So there's many different things here to take a look at. They could, they definitely want school administrators to determine underused or underutilized school spaces to increase classroom space and to facilitate social distancing. And this might include some classes outside where it's feasible. I hope they don't do that in South Texas, but some places where the weather is nicer outside and not over 100 degrees in the summer might make good sense. So I'll make sure I share this with you down in the comments below. And this is at the CDC, and it's called Preparing K-12 School Administrators for a Safe Return to School in the Fall of 2020. So there's some updates for you on the conversation we had with Guy Grace earlier in the year, and he did bring up some great points. Go to passK12.org to learn more about the guidelines. The 5th edition Pass K-12 school guidelines are still pending publication, but they should be coming out very soon. So you can take a look at some of the resources available there. Thanks for joining us today on What's Your Perspective Live. We appreciate Neil for guiding that conversation previously, and for Guy Grace for joining us. And he is always such a great guest to have on the show because he's so knowledgeable about school security. Again, my name is Keith Harris, and this has been What's Your Perspective Live from LENSEC.